It was the late 1990s in the city of Tijuana, Mexico, a place where the sun always seemed to burn a little too brightly, and the streets were filled with a sense of danger that seemed to pulse in the air. The city, located right at the border with the United States, had long been a battleground for powerful drug cartels vying for control of the lucrative smuggling routes that led to California. But in the shadows of the violence, there was a figure rising, one whose name would soon become synonymous with both fear and respect: Enedina Arellano Félix. Now, Enedina's story doesn't begin with the usual whispers of violence or the cold-hearted ambition that often accompanies the rise of a cartel boss. No, hers was a story shaped by family ties, by duty, and by a singular drive to survive and conquer in an ever more brutal world. She wasn't a man in a suit making deals in dimly lit backrooms. She was a woman in a world dominated by men. But if anyone could rise above the chaos, it was Enedina, the birth of a matriarch. Enedina Arellano Félix was born in 1960, just across the border in the gritty city of Tijuana. Her family was not ordinary. The Arellano Félix family, known as one of the most feared and respected in the world of drug trafficking, had long controlled key parts of the drug trade. The patriarchs of the family were her brothers, Benjamin and Ramon, both of whom would carve out their own terrifying legacies within the criminal world. But Enedina, for a time, remained in the background, a silent observer in the chaos that swirled around her. However, this silence would not last. By the mid-1990s, after the bloody battles and betrayals that had rocked the cartel world, Enedina found herself thrust into the position of leadership. The power vacuum left by the fall of several key cartel leaders, including her brother Benjamin, opened the door for her to step into a role that had once been dominated by men. And it was in this moment of chaos that Enedina proved she was not just another player in the game. She was destined to control it. The Tijuana Cartel at war. Imagine the scene. The early 2000s in Tijuana were a powder keg of violence, with the Tijuana Cartel constantly at war with its fiercest rival, the Sinaloa Cartel, led by the infamous Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. It wasn't just a turf war, it was a battle for survival. Drug routes, billions of dollars in profits, and control over vast territories hung in the balance. Enedina was now the matriarch of the Arellano Félix family, and the weight of that responsibility was not lost on her. Her family had been built on violence, but Enedina's approach was far more calculated. She wasn't about making headlines with loud displays of power. She was about stealth, precision, and eliminating anyone who dared to challenge her. In the years that followed, the streets of Tijuana would run red with the blood of her enemies, both those from rival cartels and those she simply couldn't trust. The elimination of her rivals was not just a tactical move, it was a message. Every death, every bloody confrontation, every assassination was a declaration of dominance. The tactics of a ruthless queen. Picture a cold, moonless night in Tijuana. The air is thick with tension, and the city sleeps under a veil of fear. Enedina sits in the shadows, her mind working, calculating the next move in the grand chess game of drug trafficking. Her eyes scan the landscape, rivals, allies, and potential threats. They were everywhere. For Enedina, survival in this world meant one thing: removing any person or group that might stand in her way. And she was ruthless in her tactics. The killings began to pile up. There were shootings in broad daylight, bodies dumped on the side of the road, and disappearances that sent a chilling message to anyone who dared to oppose her. It wasn't enough to just kill her rivals. She wanted to send a message so loud and clear that even the bravest would think twice before challenging her rule. One of the most infamous instances was the ruthless elimination of several members of the Gulf Cartel, one of the Tijuana Cartel's biggest rivals. In 1997, Enedina orchestrated a series of executions that shook the drug world to its core. These killings weren't swift and quiet. No, they were public, brutal affairs meant to terrify not just the Gulf Cartel, but every other player in the game. The bodies were displayed in public, leaving no doubt about who held the power in the region. But it wasn't just about the public killings. Enedina also understood the importance of strategy, of crippling a rival cartel from the inside out. While many of her rivals were still trying to play by old-school methods, Enedina's mind was already several steps ahead. She would target not just the cartel leaders but their entire operations, their men, their routes, their resources. She understood that to truly defeat a rival, you needed to destroy them at every level. The war with the Sinaloa Cartel. By the early 2000s, Enedina's cartel had cemented its place as one of the most powerful forces in Mexico. But power, as she soon discovered, was never permanent. The Sinaloa Cartel, led by the legendary El Chapo, was rapidly expanding its reach, and Enedina's empire was under siege. The battle between the two cartels reached new heights of violence and bloodshed. The Sinaloa Cartel's brutality was well known, and El Chapo himself was no stranger to using terror to achieve his goals. But Enedina, ever the tactician, wasn't content to simply match El Chapo's methods. She adapted, she evolved, and she struck with a level of precision that left even the most hardened drug lords in awe. As the two cartels clashed, the killings continued. Rival gang leaders were found dead in brutal fashion. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Every bullet fired, every life lost was a message to the other side. This wasn't about territory anymore, it was about survival. One of the defining moments of this war came when Enedina's brother, Enedina Arellano Félix, was killed in a shootout with Mexican police in 2002. His death was a devastating blow to the cartel, but Enedina refused to back down. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. She wasn't going to let her family's empire fall apart. She fought harder, more strategically, and more violently than ever. The war between the Tijuana Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel continued for years, with Enedina's cartel suffering heavy losses. But she wasn't finished yet. Behind the scenes, she continued to pull the strings, manipulating the people around her, always staying one step ahead of her rivals and the authorities. The fall of the Tijuana Cartel. Despite her strategic brilliance, the fall of the Tijuana Cartel was inevitable. As the Mexican government intensified its war on drugs, law enforcement, and military operations began targeting Enedina's organization. Corruption, once a valuable tool, became more difficult to maintain. Internal betrayals within her own cartel weakened her hold. By the mid-2000s, Enedina's empire was slowly crumbling. Rival cartels had gained ground, and the government's pressure was mounting. The era of the Arellano Félix family's dominance in the drug trade was coming to an end. But Enedina, true to her nature, never gave up the fight. She remained elusive, staying in the shadows as the world around her fell apart. Her future, like the future of the Tijuana Cartel, remains uncertain. While Enedina's power may have waned, her legacy is undeniable. She was not just a woman in a man's world. She was a matriarch who ruled with an iron fist, a leader who used her brains and her brutality to rise above the chaos. The legacy of a queen. In the years that followed, Enedina Arellano Félix's name became legendary. She was the woman who had led one of the most powerful cartels in the world. The executions of her rivals, her cunning, and her ironclad control over her territory had left a mark on Mexico's criminal landscape that would not soon be forgotten. And as the drug wars in Mexico continue to this day, the story of Enedina serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which people will go for power, and the price of that power. She was a queen in a kingdom built on blood, and her story, like so many others in the world of cartels, is one of both triumph and tragedy. And that's the gripping story of Enedina Arellano Félix, the woman who rose from the shadows to rule one of the most feared cartels in the world. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. What do you think about Enedina's rise to power? We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories.